You know that saying about how my boyfriend cheated while I had cancer, but I beat cancer and upgraded my man? Well, buckle up, Buttercup, because that's exactly what happened to me, and trust me when I say the universe has one hell of a sense of humor. The thing about cancer is that it strips away all the bullshit. When you're sitting in a hospital bed at 26, bald as a cue ball and wondering if you're going to see your next birthday, you kind of expect the people who claim to love you to step up to the plate. You expect them to hold your hand through the chemo, to tell you that you're beautiful even when you're puking your guts out, and to maybe, just maybe, keep their dick in their pants while you're literally fighting for your life. But expectations, as I learned, are just premeditated resentments. I should have known something was off when Jake started getting weird about his phone. We're talking about a guy who used to leave his phone face up on the table during dinner, who never bothered to put a passcode on it because he claimed he had nothing to hide. Suddenly, he's clutching that thing like it contains state secrets, flipping it over faster than a pancake on Sunday morning whenever I walked into the room. The first time I noticed it, I was 3 months into chemo. My white blood cell count was in the toilet, I could barely keep crackers down, and my energy levels were somewhere between roadkill and a deflated balloon. I shuffled into the living room of our apartment, the same apartment where we'd talked about marriage, where we'd picked out paint colors for the nursery we'd have someday, and there he was, hunched over his phone like some kind of digital gremlin. The sound of my slippers on the hardwood made him jump so hard, he nearly launched his phone into orbit. He slammed it face down on the coffee table with the kind of force usually reserved for killing spiders, and the guilty expression that flashed across his face was brighter than my chemo drip. My stomach dropped, and it wasn't from the nausea medication. But I was tired. God, I was so fucking tired. Fighting cancer is like running a marathon while someone continuously punches you in the face, and I didn't have the energy to fight about a suspicious phone flip. So I filed it away in the back of my mind, right next to all the other little things that had been bothering me, like how he'd started working late more often, how he'd suddenly developed a newfound passion for going to the gym at weird hours, how he'd stopped initiating sex, not that I was particularly in the mood, but still, the complete radio silence was notable. How he'd started doing his own laundry, separating his clothes from mine like I had some kind of contagious disease. Well, I guess I technically did have a contagious disease, but you know what I mean. The second red flag came during week 4 of treatment. I was having one of my better days, the kind where I could actually keep food down and didn't feel like I'd been hit by a freight train. I decided to surprise Jake with his favorite dinner, homemade lasagna with that fancy cheese he liked from the Italian place downtown. I spent the entire afternoon in the kitchen, moving slow but steady, layering noodles and sauce and cheese with the kind of methodical patience that chemo had taught me. My hands were shaking from the steroids, but I was determined to do something normal, something that reminded us both of who I used to be before cancer turned me into this pale, brittle version of myself. When Jake walked through the door at 7 p.m., I was standing in the kitchen wearing my favorite wig, the one that looked most like my old hair, and a dress that used to fit me perfectly, but now hung off my frame like I was playing dress-up in someone else's clothes. His face when he saw me was wrong. Instead of the smile I was expecting, the one that used to light up when he'd come home to find me cooking, there was this flash of something that looked suspiciously like annoyance, like I was interrupting something. The lasagna smelled amazing. The kitchen was warm and filled with the kind of homey atmosphere we used to take for granted. I'd even managed to put on makeup, covering the dark circles under my eyes and adding some color to my cheeks that the chemo had leached away. He looked at me like I was a problem he needed to solve. That's when I knew. I didn't have proof yet, but I knew. It was the same way you know when you're about to throw up, or when you're about to fall down the stairs. Some deep, primal part of my brain started screaming danger signals, and every cell in my body went cold despite the warmth from the oven. But I smiled anyway. Because that's what you do when you're fighting cancer, and you can't afford to lose any more battles. You smile and you pretend that everything is fine, even when your world is crumbling around you like a house of cards in a hurricane. We ate dinner in silence. He complimented the lasagna, but his phone kept buzzing on the table between us, and each notification made him twitch like he was receiving electric shocks. I watched him fight not to look at it, watched the war playing out on his face between maintaining appearances and desperately wanting to check his messages. After dinner, he mumbled something about needing to run to the store for work supplies. At 9 p.m., on a Wednesday, I watched him leave from the living room window, and that's when I noticed he'd forgotten his wallet on the kitchen counter. Jake never forgot his wallet. Ever. This was a man who double-checked his pockets for his keys, wallet, and phone every single time he left the house, like some kind of personal security ritual. But there it was, sitting next to the salt and pepper shakers, completely abandoned. The smart move would have been to call him and tell him to come back for it. The trusting girlfriend move would have been to grab it and drive it to him, because I knew exactly where the office supply store was, and it wasn't that far away. Instead, I stood there staring at that wallet like it was a live grenade, knowing that whatever I found inside was going to change everything. My hands were trembling, whether from the chemo or from adrenaline, I couldn't tell, but I picked it up anyway. His credit cards were all there. His driver's license, his insurance card, even some cash. Everything a person would need to actually buy office supplies, which meant he wasn't buying office supplies. The realization hit me like a physical blow, right in the chest where my port was installed. I sank down onto one of the kitchen chairs, still holding his wallet, and felt something inside me crack. Not break, not yet, but crack, like ice on a pond when the temperature drops too fast. I sat there for 20 minutes, waiting for him to come back for his wallet, waiting for him to realize his mistake and turn around, waiting for him to prove me wrong. He never came back. When he finally walked through the door at 11:30 p.m., he was carrying a bag from the office supply store. He'd bought fucking pens and sticky notes and a pack of highlighters, probably with cash he'd borrowed from someone, or maybe he'd found a way to pay with his phone. The performance was almost admirable in its audacity. I handed him his wallet without saying a word, and he took it with a casual, "Thanks, babe," like this was all perfectly normal. Like spending 2.5 hours buying office supplies was just another Tuesday night activity. That night, I lay in bed next to him, listening to his breathing even out as he fell asleep, and I felt something cold and hard settling into my chest. It wasn't sadness, not yet. It was something more dangerous than sadness. It was clarity. The third strike came exactly 1 week later, during my worst chemo session yet. I was in the infusion center, hooked up to an IV that was pumping poison into my veins in the hopes that it would kill the cancer before it killed me. The nurses had warned me that this round would be rougher than the others, that the cumulative effect of the treatments would start to really hit me. They weren't kidding. I felt like I was dying from the inside out, like my bones were made of glass and my blood was made of acid. Every breath was an effort. Every heartbeat felt like it was happening in slow motion, and the fluorescent lights above me seemed to pulse with each wave of nausea. Jake was supposed to drive me home. It was the one thing I'd asked of him, the one responsibility I'd given him throughout this entire nightmare. I couldn't drive myself after chemo. The drugs made me too dizzy, too weak, too out of it to safely operate a vehicle. 3 hours into the treatment, with 1 hour left to go, I got a text message. "Hey babe, something came up at work. Can you get an Uber? I'll make it up to you tonight." I stared at that message until the words blurred together, until the screen of my phone became a kaleidoscope of betrayal and broken promises. The woman in the chair next to me was sleeping peacefully, her husband holding her hand and reading a book while she dozed. Across the room, another patient was getting a foot massage from her daughter, both of them laughing quietly at something on her tablet. And I was alone, texting back, "Sure, no problem." Because what else was I supposed to do? 'Cause a scene in the cancer center? Demand that my boyfriend prioritize my literal life-or-death medical treatments over whatever urgent work emergency had suddenly materialized? The Uber driver was kind. He helped me into the back seat, asked if I needed him to wait while I got settled at home, offered to carry my bag to the door. A complete stranger showed me more care and consideration in 20 minutes than my boyfriend had shown me in weeks. When I finally made it into the apartment, exhausted and shaking from the treatment, I found a note on the kitchen counter. "Sorry about today. Emergency meeting ran late. There's soup in the fridge. Get some rest. -J. Emergency meeting. At 6 p.m. on a Thursday." Right. I heated up the soup, canned chicken noodle from the grocery store, not even the good stuff, and ate it standing up in the kitchen, still wearing my coat because I was too tired to take it off. Each spoonful tasted like metal and defeat, and I found myself wondering when I'd become so easy to abandon. That night, Jake came home at midnight with flowers. Cheap ones from the grocery store, the kind you buy when you're trying to apologize for something without actually acknowledging what you did wrong. He found me on the couch, wrapped in blankets and trying to find something on Netflix that didn't make me want to throw up. He sat down next to me and put his arm around my shoulders, and I could smell perfume on his shirt. Not mine. I hadn't worn perfume in months because most scents made me nauseous. This was something floral and cloying, something that made my empty stomach lurch. "How was the treatment?" he asked, like he gave a shit. Like he hadn't abandoned me in a medical facility to go do whatever the hell he'd been doing with whoever the hell he'd been doing it with. "Fine," I said, because I didn't have the energy for a fight. Because I was saving my energy for something more important. I was saving my energy for the moment when I would finally have proof. And deep down, in the part of my brain that was still sharp despite the chemo fog, I was already starting to plan what I would do when I got it. The thing about cancer is that it teaches you patience. Real patience. Not the kind where you're tapping your foot in line at Starbucks, but the kind where you learn to wait for your body to heal, to wait for test results, to wait for the right moment to strike. And trust me, I was learning to be very, very patient. It took me 3 weeks to find the proof I needed. 3 weeks of playing the perfect, trusting girlfriend while my insides rotted from both the chemo and the growing certainty that the man I'd planned to marry was fucking someone else while I fought for my life. 3 weeks of smiling when he brought me those pathetic grocery store flowers, of thanking him when he remembered to pick up my prescriptions, of pretending not to notice when he'd shower immediately after coming home from his mysterious work emergencies. The proof came in the form of a credit card statement. I wasn't snooping. Well, okay, I was totally snooping, but I had a legitimate reason. Jake had been handling our finances while I was too sick to deal with bills and bank statements and all the mundane bullshit that keeps life running. I was supposed to be focusing on getting better, and he was supposed to be taking care of everything else. What a fucking joke that turned out to be. I was looking for the electric bill because I'd gotten a second notice in the mail, which seemed weird since Jake had assured me everything was being paid on time. That's when I found his credit card statement tucked between a stack of medical bills and insurance paperwork, like he'd tried to hide it but hadn't been quite clever enough. The charges told a story that made my blood run colder than any IV drip ever had. Dinner at Romano's, our special place where he'd told me he loved me for the first time, on a Tuesday night when he'd claimed he was working late. A charge at Victoria's Secret for $127.83 on the same day I'd been in the hospital for a blood transfusion. Hotel charges. Multiple hotel charges. The Marriott downtown, the boutique place on 5th Street, even a fucking bed and breakfast an hour outside the city. All on days when I'd been too sick to leave the house, when I'd been home alone throwing up or sleeping off the effects of treatment. But the one that really got me was the jewelry store charge. $847.52 at Henderson's Fine Jewelry, the same place where we'd looked at engagement rings 6 months before my diagnosis. The same place where I'd pointed out a delicate silver necklace with a small diamond pendant and mentioned how much I loved it. The same place where Jake had smiled and said, "Someday," in that voice that made me believe in forever, except he hadn't bought it for me. In the 3 months since that charge had appeared on his statement, I hadn't received any jewelry. No surprise gifts, no just because. Presents, no "I'm proud of you for fighting cancer." Tokens of affection, which meant he'd bought it for her, whoever she was. I sat in our bedroom, the same bedroom where I'd cried when I'd lost my hair, where he'd held me and promised that nothing would change between us, and felt something inside me shift. The crack that had started in my chest weeks ago finally broke open, but instead of sadness pouring out, it was something else entirely, something that felt like molten steel, rage, pure crystalline rage. Not the hot, explosive kind that makes you throw things and scream and burn bridges. This was different. This was cold and calculating and patient. This was the kind of rage that builds empires and destroys kingdoms. This was the kind of rage that waits. I carefully put the credit card statement back exactly where I'd found it, making sure it was positioned at the same angle, with the same crease marks. Then I went to the bathroom and threw up, not from the chemo this time, but from the sheer force of my anger. When I was done, I looked at myself in the mirror. Really looked. I was pale and thin. My cheekbones sharp where they used to be soft, my eyes too big for my face. The wig I was wearing was slightly crooked, and my hands were shaking from the steroids they'd put me on to help with the nausea. I looked like a ghost of myself, like someone who was already halfway to being dead. Perfect. See, the thing about looking like you're dying is that people underestimate you. They see the bald head and the gaunt face and the way you move like everything hurts, and they assume you're helpless. They assume you're too weak to fight back, too sick to cause trouble, too grateful for any scraps of attention to demand better treatment. Jake had made the classic mistake of confusing physical weakness with mental weakness. He'd forgotten that my brain was still sharp, that cancer might have been eating my body, but it hadn't touched my intelligence or my capacity for strategic thinking. If anything, the clarity that comes with facing your own mortality had made me smarter, more focused, more dangerous. I was going to destroy him. Not just hurt him or embarrass him or make him feel bad. I was going to systematically dismantle his life with the same precision that chemo was dismantling my cancer cells. And just like chemo, it was going to be a long, methodical process that would target everything he cared about while leaving the healthy parts of my life intact. But first I needed to know who she was. The next morning, while Jake was at work, or at least while he was wherever he went when he claimed to be at work, I called his office. I'd met his secretary, Margaret, several times at company parties and holiday events. She was a sweet woman in her 60s who'd always been kind to me, always asked about my health with genuine concern. "Oh, honey," she said when I asked if Jake was available. "He's not in today. He took another personal day. Poor thing has been so stressed lately with everything you're going through. He's taken quite a few days recently to help take care of you." Personal day? To help take care of me. While I was sitting at home alone, planning his destruction. "That's so thoughtful of him," I said, putting on my best weak girlfriend voice. "I'm actually feeling a bit better today, so I thought I'd surprise him with lunch. Do you happen to know where he might be?" Margaret paused, and I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "Well, I'm not really sure, dear. He just said he had some personal things to take care of. Maybe try his cell phone?" I thanked her and hung up, then immediately called Jake's phone. It went straight to voicemail. Of course it did. He was probably too busy with his personal things to answer calls from his cancer-stricken girlfriend. That's when I remembered the Find My iPhone app. We'd set it up months ago when I'd lost my phone in a restaurant and Jake had helped me track it down. We'd added each other to our family sharing plan, which meant I could see exactly where his phone was at any given moment. The irony was delicious. He'd literally given me the tools to catch him cheating. I opened the app with trembling fingers, not from the chemo this time, but from anticipation. His phone was at the Marriott downtown, the same hotel that had appeared on his credit card statement multiple times. He'd been there for 3 hours. I could have confronted him right then. I could have driven to the hotel, marched into the lobby, demanded to know what room he was in. I could have caught them in the act, screamed and cried and caused a scene that would have given me immediate satisfaction. Instead, I screenshot the location and saved it to a folder I created on my phone called Evidence. Then I sat back on the couch and smiled for the first time in weeks. See, the thing about revenge is that it's not about the moment of confrontation. Any idiot can catch someone cheating and lose their shit. Real revenge is about the long game. It's about gathering information, understanding your enemy's weaknesses, and then exploiting those weaknesses at the exact moment when it will cause maximum damage. Jake wasn't just cheating on me. He was cheating on his cancer-stricken girlfriend. He was lying to his employer about taking care of me while he was actually off fucking someone else. He was using our shared credit card to finance his affair. He was stealing from the joint account we'd set up for my medical expenses to pay for hotel rooms and jewelry for his mistress. This wasn't just infidelity. This was a pattern of behavior that revealed exactly what kind of person he really was, and I was going to make sure everyone knew it. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a detective. I tracked his location religiously, noting patterns and timing. Tuesdays and Thursdays seemed to be his regular days, always at the same hotel, always for 2 to 3 hours. I started taking screenshots of everything: his location, the timestamps, even the route he took to get there. I also started paying closer attention to his appearance when he came home. The shower routine I'd noticed before was actually part of a larger pattern. He'd come home, immediately head to the bathroom, shower, put his clothes directly into the hamper, and then emerge acting like nothing had happened. One day, I waited until he was in the shower and checked his clothes. Perfume, the same floral scent I'd noticed before, but stronger now that I knew what to look for. Lipstick stains on his collar that he'd tried to rub out but hadn't quite managed to erase completely. A receipt in his pocket from a restaurant I'd never been to, for 2 meals and a bottle of wine that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I photographed everything. Every stain, every receipt, every piece of evidence that proved what I already knew. I was building a case, collecting ammunition for a war that Jake didn't even know he was fighting. The most challenging part was maintaining the facade. Pretending to be weak and trusting and grateful while I was actually planning his downfall required acting skills I didn't know I possessed. I had to smile when he brought me flowers, thank him when he picked up my prescriptions, act concerned when he claimed to be working late. But the hardest part was the sex, or rather the lack of it. Jake had completely stopped initiating any kind of physical contact beyond the occasional peck on the cheek or pat on the shoulder. At first, I'd assumed it was because of how I looked, the weight loss, the pale skin, the general appearance of someone who was seriously ill. But now I knew better. He wasn't touching me because he was getting it elsewhere. He wasn't kissing me because he was kissing someone else. He wasn't making love to me because he was making love to her, whoever she was. The revelation should have hurt more than it did. Instead, it just made me more determined. Every rejection, every excuse, every time he claimed to be too tired or too stressed or too worried about my health to be intimate was just more fuel for the fire I was building. I started working out again. Not much. I barely had the energy to walk around the block, but enough to start rebuilding some of the muscle mass I'd lost during treatment. I started eating more, forcing myself to consume protein shakes and supplements that would help me gain weight and strength. I started taking better care of my appearance, not for Jake, but for myself, for what was coming, because I was going to need to be strong for what I had planned, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. I was going to need to be at my absolute best when I finally made my move. 3 weeks into my investigation, I got lucky. I was tracking Jake's location on a Thursday afternoon when I noticed something different. Instead of going to the hotel, he'd gone to a coffee shop across town. The same coffee shop where he'd stayed for exactly 47 minutes before moving to a different location, an apartment complex I'd never seen before. He stayed there for 20 minutes. Just long enough to walk someone to their door, maybe have a conversation, maybe steal a kiss goodbye, but not long enough for their usual hotel routine. I had her address. That night, I lay in bed next to Jake and listened to him sleep, and I felt something that I hadn't felt in months. Not happiness exactly, but something close to it. Satisfaction. The deep, bone-deep satisfaction of knowing that I was finally going to get what I deserved. Justice. And maybe, if I played my cards right, a little bit more than that. The next morning, I started phase 2 of my plan. While Jake was at work, actual work this time according to his location, I drove to the apartment complex. It was a nice place, upscale but not flashy, the kind of place where a young professional might live if they had a good job but weren't quite ready for a mortgage. I parked across the street and waited. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for exactly, but I knew I'd recognize it when I saw it. Call it intuition, call it fate, call it the universe finally deciding to throw me a fucking bone. At 2:47 p.m., she walked out of the building. She was beautiful. Not just pretty, beautiful. Tall and blonde and put together in a way that made me acutely aware of my own appearance. She was wearing a business suit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, carrying a handbag that I recognized from a magazine I'd been reading in the chemo center. She looked healthy and vibrant and alive, everything that I wasn't, everything that I used to be. I watched her get into a silver BMW and drive away, and I felt something twist in my chest. Not jealousy, well, okay, maybe a little jealousy, but something deeper than that. Recognition. I was looking at the woman Jake had chosen to replace me, and I was looking at everything I'd lost. But I was also looking at the key to everything I was going to gain. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in months. I went shopping. Not for groceries or medical supplies or any of the necessities that had become my life. I went shopping for myself. For clothes that would fit my new, thinner body. For makeup that would give me back some color. For a new wig that looked more natural than the one I'd been wearing. I spent Jake's money, our money technically, but at this point I figured I was owed some back pay for services rendered, and I bought myself a new wardrobe. Not the comfortable, easy-to-wear clothes I'd been living in, but real clothes. Professional clothes. Clothes that would make me look like someone who should be taken seriously. Because I was about to become someone who should be taken seriously. The plan was beautiful in its simplicity. I was going to let Jake keep digging his own grave while I gathered evidence and built my case. I was going to let him think he was getting away with it, that I was too sick and too trusting to ever figure out what was really going on. And then, when I had everything I needed, when I was strong enough to handle what came next, I was going to burn his entire world down. Starting with his job, then his reputation, then his relationship with his family, his friends, anyone who had ever thought he was a decent person. I was going to systematically destroy every single thing he cared about, and I was going to do it with the same methodical precision that he'd used to destroy my trust. The best part? He was going to help me do it. Every lie he told, every excuse he made, every time he chose her over me was just another weapon in my arsenal. He was literally handing me the ammunition I needed to destroy him. But I wasn't going to stop there. Oh no, I had bigger plans than just exposing Jake as the cheating piece of shit he was. I was going to upgrade my entire life. I was going to come out of this situation stronger, healthier, and better than I'd ever been before. I was going to beat cancer, dump the dead weight, and find myself a man who actually deserved me. The universe had tried to kill me with cancer, and I'd fought back. Jake had tried to break me with betrayal, and I was going to fight back even harder. Because I was done being the victim. I was done being the sick girlfriend who was grateful for scraps of attention. I was done being weak. It was time to remind everyone, Jake, his little side piece, the entire fucking world, exactly who they were dealing with. I was about to become the kind of woman who didn't just survive cancer. I was about to become the kind of woman who thrived because of it. The beautiful thing about having cancer is that it gives you perspective on what really matters. And what really mattered to me now was making sure Jake's life imploded in the most spectacular way possible. But I wasn't going to be sloppy about it. Cancer had taught me patience, and patience was about to become Jake's worst nightmare. My first move was to become the perfect girlfriend again. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but hear me out. I started greeting him at the door with a smile, asking about his day, cooking his favorite meals when I had the energy. I bought new lingerie, expensive stuff that actually fit my new body, and started initiating sex again. Not because I wanted him, but because I needed him to think everything was fine. I needed him to get comfortable, to let his guard down, to stop being so careful about covering his tracks. The change in his behavior was immediate and telling. He started staying out later, being less careful about his phone, even taking calls from her while I was in the same room. He'd step out onto the balcony or into the bathroom, but he was getting sloppy, confident. He thought he'd successfully gaslit me into believing I was just a paranoid sick girl who was imagining things. What he didn't know was that I'd installed a voice recorder app on my phone and was documenting every single conversation, every lie, every excuse. I was building a fucking library of evidence. "Hey, babe," he said one Tuesday evening, not even bothering to look up from his phone. "I'm going to be late tomorrow. Big presentation for the Morrison account." I smiled sweetly from the kitchen where I was making his favorite pasta. "That's fine, honey. I'm proud of you for working so hard, especially during such a difficult time." He had the decency to look slightly guilty. "Yeah, well, you know how it is. Gotta provide for us, especially with all the medical bills." Medical bills? The same medical bills he was ignoring while he spent our money on hotel rooms and jewelry for his side piece. I wanted to throw the boiling pasta water in his face, but instead I just nodded sympathetically. "You're such a good man, Jake. I don't know what I'd do without you." The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. 2 days later, I followed him. Not to the hotel this time, but to a restaurant downtown. I parked across the street and watched through the window as he sat at a cozy table for two, checking his watch every few minutes. At 7:23 p.m., she walked in. Seeing them together was like watching a car accident in slow motion. I couldn't look away, even though every second felt like someone was driving nails into my chest. He stood up when she arrived, kissed her cheek, pulled out her chair. He was being the gentleman he'd stopped being with me months ago. They were holding hands across the table, sharing dessert, laughing at each other's jokes. He was looking at her the way he used to look at me, before cancer turned me into an inconvenience in his life. But here's the thing about rock bottom. It gives you a solid foundation to build on. As I sat in my car, watching my boyfriend of 3 years play house with another woman, I felt something click into place. Not sadness, not even anger anymore. Just cold, crystal-clear determination. I took photos, lots of them, from every angle, with timestamps, making sure you could clearly see both of their faces. Then I went home and added them to my evidence folder, which was now so extensive it could probably be submitted as a doctoral thesis on the subject of how to destroy your cheating boyfriend's life. That night, Jake came home with flowers again. The same cheap grocery store bouquet he'd been buying to assuage his guilt for weeks. I thanked him, put them in water, and asked how his presentation went. "Great," he said, not missing a beat. "Really great. I think we're going to land the account." I wanted to ask him what the Morrison account tasted like, since he'd clearly been eating it for dinner instead of sitting across from it in a conference room. But I just smiled and told him I was proud of him. The next phase of my plan required me to do something I'd been putting off for weeks. I needed to get stronger, not just emotionally, but physically. I was tired of looking like a victim, tired of feeling weak, tired of being the sick girlfriend who was grateful for scraps of attention. So I started fighting back against the cancer and the chemo with the same intensity I was going to use to fight back against Jake. I hired a trainer who specialized in working with cancer patients. Her name was Maria, and she was a badass former Marine who'd helped dozens of people rebuild their strength during treatment. She didn't coddle me or treat me like I was made of glass. She pushed me, challenged me, and slowly but surely helped me start feeling like myself again. The thing about chemo, she told me during one of our sessions, is that it breaks you down to build you back up, but you get to choose what you build back up into. I chose to build back up into someone who could destroy Jake's life without breaking a sweat. I also started working with a therapist, not because I was falling apart, but because I needed to make sure I was approaching this situation from a place of strength rather than just pure rage. Dr. Sarah Chen was a no-nonsense woman who specialized in helping people navigate major life transitions. She helped me understand that what I was going through wasn't just about Jake's betrayal, it was about reclaiming my power and rebuilding my life. You're not just surviving cancer, she told me during one of our sessions. You're using it as a catalyst to become the person you were always meant to be. Damn right I was. 6 weeks into my transformation, I was ready for phase 3. I'd gained back some weight, my color was returning, and I felt stronger than I had in months. More importantly, I looked stronger. The gaunt, ghostly appearance was gone, replaced by someone who looked like she could handle whatever life threw at her. It was time to meet the other woman. I'd been tracking her routine for weeks. She worked at a marketing firm downtown, grabbed coffee at the same place every morning at 8:15 a.m., and had lunch at the little bistro around the corner from her office every Tuesday and Thursday. She was a creature of habit, which made her predictable, and predictable people are easy to approach. I chose a Thursday morning. I was wearing one of my new outfits, a fitted blazer that actually looked good on my thinner frame, and jeans that made me look put together rather than sick. I'd styled my wig carefully and put on makeup that gave me back some color. I didn't look like the same person who'd been wasting away in a hospital bed 3 months ago. I was sitting at a corner table in the coffee shop when she walked in. She looked exactly the same as she had from across the street, beautiful, put together, radiating the kind of confidence that comes from never having to fight for your life. She ordered a large cappuccino with an extra shot and a blueberry muffin, then looked around for a place to sit. "Excuse me," I said, standing up and walking over to her. "Are you Amanda?" She looked surprised but not alarmed. "Yes, I am. Do we know each other?" "Not yet," I said, extending my hand. "I'm Sarah, Jake's girlfriend." The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might pass out. Her coffee cup trembled in her hands, and she looked around the cafe like she was planning her escape route. I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered. "Oh, I think you do," I said, my voice calm and steady. "But don't worry, I'm not here to cause a scene. I'm here to have a conversation, adult to adult." She looked like she was about to bolt, so I played the cancer card. "Look, I've been fighting cancer for the past 4 months. I'm too tired for drama and too sick for games. I just want to talk." The combination of the cancer mention and my matter-of-fact tone seemed to throw her off balance. She hesitated for a moment, then slowly followed me back to my table. "How long have you known?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "About you? A few weeks? About Jake being a lying piece of shit?" "Much longer." She winced at my language, but I wasn't about to sugarcoat anything for her comfort. "I know about the hotel rooms," I continued. "I know about the jewelry he bought you. I know about the restaurants and the lies he's been telling both of us. What I don't know is whether you knew about me." She was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her hands. When she finally looked up, there were tears in her eyes. "I knew," she whispered. "I knew about you, and I knew about the cancer. He told me that you were probably not going to make it. He said you were basically already broken up, that he was just staying with you out of obligation until I died." I finished for her. She nodded, unable to meet my eyes. "So you thought you were dating a man who was just waiting for his cancer-stricken girlfriend to die so he could be with you guilt-free?" When I put it like that, she looked physically ill. "I know how it sounds. I know how awful it is. But he said you were suffering, that you were in pain, that maybe it would be better if I just hurried up and died so you two could be together." She started crying then. Real, ugly tears that made her mascara run and her nose turn red. "I'm so sorry. I'm so fucking sorry. I know there's no excuse for what I did, but I thought I was in love with him. I thought he was going to leave you after you were gone. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no satisfaction. Just a cold, empty clarity that told me everything I needed to know about both of them. Well, I said, standing up, I hate to break it to you, but I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to beat this cancer, and I'm going to destroy Jake's life, and then I'm going to move on and find someone who actually deserves me. The question is, what are you going to do? She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. What do you mean? I mean, are you going to keep being the other woman, or are you going to help me take down the man who's been lying to both of us? I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was realizing that Jake had played her just as much as he'd played me. That he'd used her sympathy and her feelings to manipulate her into a situation where she was complicit in his betrayal. What do you want me to do? She asked. I want you to text him right now and tell him you need to see him tonight. Tell him it's urgent. Tell him you have news. What kind of news? I smiled for the first time since I'd sat down. You're going to tell him you're pregnant. Her eyes widened. But I'm not. I know you're not. But he doesn't know that. And I want to see how he reacts when he thinks his perfect little side piece is about to complicate his life. She stared at me for a long moment, then slowly pulled out her phone. You're kind of terrifying, you know that. Good, I said. I'm just getting started. She sent the text, and Jake's response came back almost immediately. Holy shit. Are you sure? Can we meet at the usual place at 7? Perfect, I said. Now, here's what's going to happen. You're going to meet him at the hotel. You're going to tell him about the pregnancy and see how he reacts. And you're going to record the entire conversation. I can't. You can and you will, because you owe me. And because he's about to show you exactly what kind of man he really is. That evening, I sat in my car in the hotel parking lot waiting for Amanda's text. I knew Jake was in there, probably having a complete meltdown about the possibility of his side piece being pregnant while his girlfriend was fighting cancer. I knew he was calculating how this would affect his life, his reputation, his carefully constructed facade. My phone buzzed at 8:47 p.m. It was a text from Amanda. You were right. About everything. I'm sending you the recording now. I listened to the entire thing sitting in my car. Jake's voice was clear and panicked as he tried to convince Amanda to take care of the problem. He talked about how they couldn't have a baby now, not with everything that was going on with me. He suggested she get an abortion, offered to pay for it, even said he'd drive her to the clinic. But the part that really got me was when she asked him what would happen after I died. His response was so casual, so matter-of-fact, that it made my blood run cold. Well, obviously I'll need some time to grieve and get my life back together. But then we can be together properly. No more sneaking around, no more hotels. We can have a real relationship. He was planning my funeral while I was still alive. He was making plans for our future while I was fighting for mine. That's when I knew it was time for the final phase. I drove home and found Jake sitting on the couch, staring at his phone with a shell-shocked expression. He looked up when I walked in, and for a moment I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Hey babe, he said, his voice strained. How was your day? Oh, you know, I said, sitting down next to him. Just the usual. Chemo, doctor's appointments, meeting with your girlfriend to discuss your secret relationship. The usual Thursday activities. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might pass out. Sarah, Save it, I said, pulling out my phone. I have recordings of every lie you've told me for the past 2 months. I have photos of you and Amanda at dinner. I have copies of your credit card statements showing every hotel room, every restaurant, every piece of jewelry you bought for her with our money. I have screenshots of your location every time you claim to be at work, but were actually fucking someone else. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. I'm not done. I also have a recording of your conversation with Amanda tonight, where you discussed how excited you are for me to die so you two can be together. Where you tried to convince her to get an abortion because having a baby would interfere with your timeline for my death. He looked like he was going to be sick. Sarah, please, you have to understand. Oh, I understand perfectly, I said, standing up. I understand that you're a pathetic excuse for a human being who was literally counting down the days until your cancer-stricken girlfriend died so you could start your new life guilt-free. I understand that you used our joint account to finance your affair. I understand that you lied to your boss about taking personal days to take care of me while you were actually off fucking someone else. I walked over to our bedroom and grabbed the suitcase I'd already packed with his clothes. Here's what's going to happen, I said, dropping the suitcase at his feet. You're going to get the fuck out of my apartment. You're going to stay the fuck out of my life. And if you ever contact me again, I'm going to send every single piece of evidence I have to your boss, your family, your friends, and anyone else who might be interested in knowing what kind of person you really are. Sarah, please. Oh, and Jake? I said, pulling out my phone one more time. I'm not dying. My latest scan came back clean. I'm going to beat this cancer, and I'm going to live a long, happy life without you in it. Amanda's not pregnant either, by the way. We made that up to see how you'd react. And you failed spectacularly. He stared at me like I'd just told him the sky was green. You're not, but the doctors said I had a good chance of beating this if I caught it early, which I did. They said I'd need chemotherapy, which I got. They said I'd need to be strong and surround myself with people who loved and supported me, which clearly didn't include you. I opened the door and gestured for him to leave. Get out, Jake. Get out of my apartment, get out of my life, and get out of my fucking sight. He stood there for a moment longer, suitcase in hand, looking like he couldn't quite process what was happening. Then he walked to the door, turned back like he was going to say something, thought better of it, and left. I locked the door behind him, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of wine. Then I sat on the couch and allowed myself to feel something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not happiness, not yet, but peace. The kind of deep, bone-deep peace that comes from knowing you've done the right thing, that you've fought for yourself, that you've refused to be anyone's victim. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. Thank you for showing me who he really was. I'm sorry for everything. I deleted the text without responding. I didn't need her apology, and I didn't need her gratitude. I needed her gone from my life just as much as I needed Jake gone. But as I sat there in the quiet of my apartment, sipping wine and feeling the weight of the last few months finally lifting off my shoulders, I realized something important. I wasn't just getting rid of Jake. I was getting rid of the version of myself that had been willing to accept so little, the version that had been grateful for scraps of attention, that had made excuses for someone else's shitty behavior, that had been so afraid of being alone that she'd rather be with someone who was literally waiting for her to die. That version of me was gone, dead and buried, just like Jake had hoped I would be. In her place was someone stronger, someone smarter, someone who knew her worth and wouldn't settle for anything less than what she deserved. Someone who had beaten cancer and was about to beat everything else life threw at her. Someone who was ready to upgrade everything about her life, starting with finding a man who actually deserved her. The best part? I was just getting started. 6 months later, I was sitting in a different coffee shop, not the one where I'd confronted Amanda, because I'm not a masochist, when I saw the engagement announcement on Facebook. Jake and Amanda, beaming at the camera, her left hand prominently displayed with a ring that looked suspiciously similar to the one we'd looked at together all those months ago. The caption read, "She said yes. Can't wait to start our life together. Blessed soulmates, true love." I stared at the screen for exactly 3 seconds before I started laughing. Not the bitter, angry laugh you'd expect, but genuine, honest-to-God amusement. Because the whole thing was just so perfectly, predictably pathetic. Jake had managed to find the one woman on earth who was stupid enough to marry a man who'd cheated on his cancer-stricken girlfriend. And Amanda had managed to convince herself that a relationship built on lies and betrayal was somehow going to result in a fairy tale ending. Good fucking luck to both of them. I closed Facebook and looked around the coffee shop, taking in the scene. It was one of those trendy places with exposed brick walls and baristas who looked like they'd stepped out of a Portland hipster magazine. The kind of place the old me would have felt intimidated by, but the new me felt completely comfortable in. Because the new me had learned something important. Confidence isn't about being perfect. It's about knowing you can handle whatever life throws at you. And I'd proven to myself that I could handle anything. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Martinez. Latest scan results are in. Still clear. See you in 6 months for your next checkup. I smiled and typed back, thank you. See you then. 2 years cancer-free. 2 years of clean scans, of my body getting stronger, of my hair growing back thicker and healthier than it had been before. 2 years of building a life that was actually worth living. The irony wasn't lost on me that getting cancer had been the best thing that ever happened to me. Not because I enjoyed being sick, that part had sucked just as much as you'd imagine, but because it had forced me to confront the reality of my life, to stop making excuses for people who didn't deserve them, to stop accepting less than what I was worth. Cancer had burned away all the bullshit and left me with something pure and unbreakable, the knowledge that I was strong enough to survive anything. Sarah? I looked up to find a man standing next to my table, holding a coffee cup and looking slightly nervous. "I'm sorry to bother you, but you're Doctor Chen's patient, right?" "I'm Marcus. We met at her office a few weeks ago." I remembered him. Tall, dark hair, kind eyes, nervous energy that suggested he was probably overthinker. He'd been in the waiting room when I'd arrived for my appointment, and we'd struck up a conversation about the terrible magazines they kept in the lobby. He'd made me laugh, which was not an easy thing to do in a therapist's office. "Marcus, right," I said, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. "How's the therapy going?" He sat down, still looking nervous. "Good, actually. Really good. Dr. Chen is helping me work through some stuff from my divorce. What about you?" "Same. Well, different stuff, but same general concept of working through trauma and coming out stronger on the other side." We talked for almost an hour. About therapy, about coffee, about the book he was reading and the Netflix series I was binge-watching. He was funny and smart and genuinely interested in what I had to say. More importantly, he looked at me like I was a person, not a cancer survivor or a victim or someone who needed to be handled with kid gloves. When he asked if I wanted to grab dinner sometime, I said yes without hesitation. Not because I was looking for a rebound or trying to prove something to myself, but because I genuinely wanted to spend more time with him. Because I'd learned the difference between settling for someone and choosing someone. That night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and looked at myself. Really looked. My hair had grown back in soft waves that I actually liked better than my old straight hair. My skin was clear and healthy. I'd gained back the weight I'd lost during treatment, but I was stronger now, more toned from all the workouts with Maria. I looked like someone who had been through hell and come out the other side with a deeper understanding of what really mattered. I looked like someone who had upgraded her entire life. The next morning, I got a text from an unknown number. "Hey, it's Amanda. I saw your Facebook post about your 2-year cancer-free anniversary. I just wanted to say congratulations. I also wanted to apologize again for everything that happened. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to tell you that what you did, calling me out, making me see who Jake really was, it changed my life. I broke up with him 3 months ago. I'm in therapy now, working on myself. I hope you're doing well." I stared at the message for a long time, trying to decide how to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let sleeping dogs lie. But another part of me, the part that had been through hell and lived to tell the tale, felt something that might have been compassion. I typed back, "Thank you for the apology. I'm glad you're working on yourself. For what it's worth, I hope you find someone who actually deserves you. We both deserve better than what Jake had to offer." She responded immediately, "We really do. Thank you for showing me that." I deleted the conversation and blocked her number. Not out of anger, but out of self-preservation. That chapter of my life was closed, and I wasn't interested in reopening it for anyone. 2 weeks later, I had my first date with Marcus. We went to a small Italian restaurant where we talked about everything and nothing, where he made me laugh until my sides hurt, where he told me about his work as a teacher, and I told him about my job at the nonprofit I'd started working for after I'd gotten healthy, where he walked me to my car and kissed me goodnight like I was something precious. As I drove home, I thought about the woman I'd been 2 years ago. The woman who'd been so desperate for love that she'd accepted scraps from someone who saw her as disposable. The woman who'd been so afraid of being alone that she'd rather be with someone who was literally waiting for her to die. That woman was gone. In her place was someone who knew her worth, who had fought for her life and won, who had learned that being alone was better than being with the wrong person. Someone who had faced down cancer and betrayal and come out stronger on the other side. Someone who had beaten cancer and upgraded her man, just like the title promised. And as I pulled into my driveway, I realized something that made me smile all the way to my front door. This was just the beginning. I'd survived the worst thing that had ever happened to me, and I'd used it as a catalyst to build a life that was better than anything I'd ever imagined. The universe had tried to break me, and I'd refused to stay broken. Jake had tried to discard me, and I'd discarded him right back. Cancer had tried to kill me, and I'd killed it instead. I was done being anyone's victim. I was done accepting less than what I deserved. I was done being grateful for scraps when I could have the whole damn meal. I was just getting started, and the best was yet to come.